The morning of Henry's funeral was colder than it should have been for October. Not freezing, not bitter, just cold in that specific way where even the fabric of your coat seems to reject your warmth, the kind of cold that doesn't shock but lingers. The maple trees in front of the chapel had turned that rusted red that always reminded me of Henry's cheeks after he'd come in from raking leaves. But Henry wasn't raking leaves this year. He wasn't doing anything anymore. I had stood in front of my bedroom mirror that morning longer than I should have. The black dress I wore wasn't new. It was one of those things I'd kept in the back of the closet, knowing someday I'd need it. I adjusted the neckline, smoothed the sleeves. My hands moved without thought. 32 years of marriage had taught me how to prepare for events like this. But nothing in those 3 decades had prepared me for what I was about to hear, not from strangers, but from my own children. The chapel was full. Henry had always been generous with his time and steady with his friendships. Former colleagues from the lumber business sat near the front, nodding solemnly. Neighbors from 2 houses ago leaned on their canes or dabbed their eyes quietly. I sat in the first pew, where everyone could see me and no one dared speak to me. Henry lay in the oak casket we picked out together 5 years ago. During one of those strange evenings where he'd insisted we plan just in case. He'd smiled that night when I asked him why we were thinking about coffins over pot roast. Because it'll matter to you more than to me, he'd said. He was right, it did. 10 minutes before the service was scheduled to start, I glanced at the chapel doors and saw them, all 3 of my children arriving together. Nathan, the oldest, led the way, his polished shoes clicking in confident, deliberate rhythm. Claire, 2 steps behind, wore a sharply tailored coat and an expression I couldn't read. Daniel brought up the rear, taller than I remembered, with Henry's college ring on a chain around his neck. They looked like they'd stepped out of a brochure for successful adult children. Straight backs, coordinated black, perfect posture. They approached me as a unit. Nathan leaned in and kissed my cheek. His cologne was expensive, sharp. "We need to talk after the service," he said, "about the house, about your next steps." My next steps, like I was a pending transaction. I nodded, though I already felt something inside me lean away. It wasn't new, just clearer now. The service passed the way all services do when you've been grieving for weeks already. Henry had taken too long to die, and by the end, I'd already said my goodbyes in quiet, private ways. The prayers were familiar. The hymns were ones we used to sing together in the car. When the pastor opened the floor for shared memories, I looked toward my children, expecting someone, anyone, to stand. Nathan did. He stepped to the podium like he belonged there. His voice was smooth, confident, the kind of tone that made clients sign dotted lines. Claire and Daniel flanked him, their hands clasped, their expressions neutral. "Thank you all for coming," Nathan began. "Our father was a man who built things, a business, a legacy, a family. So far, so good. He always told us," Nathan continued, "that he wanted to make sure everything he worked for stayed in the family, that we, his children, would carry on his vision. We take that seriously." Claire took a step forward. Her voice was calm, measured. "He entrusted us with the business, the estate, the properties, everything he built. And, Then Daniel looked straight at me, his eyes not unkind, but unreadable, and said the words, "I will remember long after my body forgets the weight of this day. She will be well taken care of." From a distance. No one flinched, no one gasped, but the silence that followed was unlike any other silence I'd ever sat in. A silence not of grief, but of agreement, of quiet complicity. I felt it like a wind through the pews, like smoke curling around the edges of my name. I didn't argue. I didn't stand up. I didn't ask what they meant or how far distance would stretch. I just folded my hands in my lap, where my wedding band pressed so tightly into my finger that it left a mark, and I let the moment pass like I hadn't heard a thing. I didn't speak to anyone after the service, not to the pastor, not to the funeral director, not to my children when they came by my side to accept condolences from guests who no longer knew where to look. They said the right words. He was a good man. He'll be missed. You must be so proud. But none of it reached me. Not really. I had already said goodbye to Henry in the quietest way a person can, by watching his hand go still in mine, in a room with no noise except a clock ticking toward the inevitable. When I got home that evening, I didn't cry. I walked through our house, their childhood home, room by room, flicking on lights just to see the spaces come alive for a moment. There were still cereal boxes in the pantry with Daniel's favorite brand. The guest room still had the floral comforter Claire had chosen back when she came home after her first big breakup. Nathan's trophies were still lined up on the bookshelf in the office, dust collecting quietly beneath their names. It's a strange thing, standing in the life you built and realizing everyone else has already left it. I spent the next few days doing the only thing that made sense: organizing. I folded Henry's shirts and placed them into donation boxes. I found his cologne in the drawer, still half full, and held it to my nose. The scent broke something in me for a moment, but I didn't let it spill out. There were too many tasks waiting to be done. By day 3, the phone calls began. Nathan called first. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I was sleeping or eating or coping. Instead, he said, "Mom, I think we need to talk about the house. It's too big for you now. It doesn't make financial sense to keep it." He used the word transition, as if my life had turned into a spreadsheet he was reviewing. I told him evenly, "We'll talk after the will is read." He sighed, said something about not wanting to cause tension, then promised to circle back next week, as if I were a business partner, not a grieving mother. Claire called the next day. Her tone was professional, warm enough to suggest concern, but rehearsed like a deposition. "There's a lovely assisted living residence in Parma Heights," she said. "It has everything, weekly events, medical staff on site. It could be a really supportive environment for you." I replied, "Claire, I'm 58. "Well, yes," she said quickly. "Of course not now, but it's good to plan ahead. Dad wanted you to be secure." Secure, that word again. Daniel's call was softer. His voice still carried the boyish warmth I remembered. For a second, I thought he might break the pattern. "Mom," he said gently, "I know things are complicated right now, but Dad really did want us to take care of you." He was worried about the house, the bills. He wanted you to feel safe. "And what did you tell him, Daniel?" I asked. There was a pause. That we'd make sure you never had to worry about anything. It was meant to comfort, but it didn't, because what they didn't understand was I hadn't spent my life waiting for someone to take care of me. I'd spent it holding everyone else together. I'd done the night shifts at the hospital so Henry could grow his business. I'd packed their lunches and helped with college applications and stayed awake through every fever, heartbreak, and overdue assignment. I had carried them all through every storm. Now they were drafting contingency plans. The lawyer called on Friday to confirm the will reading would take place the following Tuesday. I thanked him. He didn't know that I already had the documents printed in a folder labeled Final Provision, EB. Henry and I had reviewed every clause together. His handwriting was still in the margins. Small notes, corrections, moments of doubt turned into lines of certainty. He'd insisted, "If anything ever happens to me, you need to be protected, not just provided for, respected." At the time, I told him he was overthinking, that our kids would never forget who raised them. He had just looked at me then. Quiet, steady. Some lessons, he said, can only be learned the hard way. The morning of the will reading, I got dressed differently than I had for the funeral. No more black. I wore the navy blue dress Henry had always said brought out my eyes. I clasped the pearl necklace he gave me on our 25th anniversary and applied lipstick with a hand that no longer trembled. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone they'd forgotten existed, not a grieving widow, not a mother to be managed, a woman who had been silent long enough. The law office sat high above downtown, with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling and made even Lake Erie look small. I arrived early, 15 minutes to be exact. Just long enough to sit alone at the edge of the conference table, Henry once said, reminded him of a poker game. Too long, too cold, too full of people pretending they weren't bluffing. My children arrived together again, always together, as if unity could still win them something. Nathan carried a sleek leather portfolio. Claire had her legal pad and pen, uncapped, already ready. Daniel walked a half step behind, quieter this time, hands in his pockets, no ring around his neck today. The lawyer, Mr. Whitmore, greeted me gently. "Elaine," he said, with a soft dip of his head, "I'm so sorry." His voice didn't overreach. He wasn't performing grief, and for that, I was grateful. He opened a thick folder and began the formalities. Every sentence was clear, cold, perfectly legal. Henry had written it all with him 6 weeks before he died. The timing was no accident. Nathan nodded along, confident. Claire listened, like she already knew what came next. Then the terms shifted. All assets, Mr. Whitmore read, are granted to the children, conditional upon their continued, documented care of their mother, Elaine Bradford. Silence. The care must include full housing support, medical coverage, and a minimum monthly allowance of $8,000. Should any child fail these obligations, their share will be revoked and redistributed. Claire blinked. Her pen stilled. Daniel stopped chewing his lip. Mr. Whitmore continued, steady now. In addition, Henry Bradford created a separate trust of $500,000 over which Elaine has full control. This is not contingent. This is permanent. Nathan's mouth opened just slightly, then closed, but it was the envelope that made the room tilt. Henry had written a letter. Mr. Whitmore broke the wax seal and read aloud. If you're hearing this, I'm gone, and you're learning what consequences feel like. This isn't about money. This is about respect. Elaine built everything beside me, not behind, beside. When you humiliated her at my funeral, you showed the world you'd forgotten that. Claire sat straighter. Nathan looked down. Daniel just stared at his lap, motionless. You think this is unfair? You think your mother's part in all this was small? She worked nights so I could build my business. She missed promotions, postponed school, hid exhaustion for your sakes. If this feels like punishment, perhaps you should ask yourselves what you're being punished for. Then came the part none of them expected. Your mother alone determines if you're meeting these conditions. Her word is final. There are no appeals. Mr. Whitmore folded the letter slowly, set it down like it was still warm. Nobody spoke, not even Claire, until Nathan tried. This can't be real. I met his gaze. Calm, certain. It's not only real, I said. It's binding, and your father made sure I'd never be treated from a distance again. They didn't call for 2 days, not after the reading, not after the trust, not after the letter. But on the third morning, right at 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. From my kitchen window, I saw Nathan's car first, shiny, spotless, parked at a perfect angle like he was still making a statement. He stood on the porch with a bouquet of white roses, my favorite. I knew he hadn't remembered that on his own. Likely had his assistant or his wife look it up. When I opened the door, he said, "Hi, Mom," like nothing had happened. I didn't answer, just stepped aside and let him in. He sat awkwardly on the edge of the couch, the roses still in hand, like he hadn't thought through what came after showing up. Then, after a silence too long to pretend away, he started. We want to make this right, he said. I brought a care plan. You know, something structured, to make sure your needs are covered. Grocery shopping, medical appointments, home repairs, divided among us fairly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a printed sheet. Organized in clean boxes, my name in bold at the top, as if I were a task. I scanned it. Grocery Mondays, doctor Tuesdays, lawn inspections monthly, my entire life broken into duty rotations. You've scheduled me, I said flatly, like a board meeting. Nathan gave a little smile, like it was supposed to be charming. I just wanted to be efficient. And the money? His smile thinned. We're setting up an automatic transfer, first of each month. From whose account? We're still figuring that part out, he admitted. Claire thinks we should split it evenly, but Gabriel's not in a great spot. I said nothing, just stared, until he cracked. Look, $8,000 a month is a lot. That's $96,000 a year. Over 30 years, that's almost $4 million, I finished. I know. Your father and I calculated it very carefully. He leaned forward. Don't you think that's excessive? I waited. Mom, he said carefully, your expenses can't possibly justify that. He didn't hear it, but I did. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. You think this is about expenses? I asked, not turning. You think this is about cost? He didn't respond, so I poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of him, let it sit. 10 minutes later, the front door opened again. Claire's voice called, Mom, Nathan's car is out front. Are you two talking? She walked in with a paper bag from my favorite bakery, like she was still my daughter from 15 years ago, who remembered Sunday cinnamon rolls. Gabriel followed close behind, quiet, eyes low. We brought these, she said, lifting the bag. Thought we could talk as a family. I motioned to the couch. They sat, shoulder to shoulder, united again. But this time, the cracks showed. I've reviewed the legal terms, Claire began. Technically, it's airtight, but if all parties agree, we might be able to adjust. I don't agree, I said. Gabriel flinched. Mom, he said softly, my practice barely breaks even. I had to sell the house. Nathan added, we're trying, but this is bleeding us, and you don't even seem angry, just distant. I'm not angry, I replied. I'm awake. Claire finally asked what none of them had dared until now. What do you want from us, Mom? I looked at them, one by one. The boy who used to kiss my forehead after dinner. The girl who called me in tears the night she failed her first exam. The baby who once couldn't sleep without my hand on his back. I want you to know, I said quietly, what it feels like to be unwanted. I want you to sit in the discomfort of remembering what it cost me to raise you, and I want you to realize that money is the easiest part of this arrangement. None of them spoke after that, because there was nothing left to explain. After that meeting, they followed the rules. The $8,000 arrived on time, on the first of every month, from Nathan's account. Claire emailed her portion quarterly. Gabriel, God bless him, started paying in cash orders, small envelopes with his neat handwriting, always dropped off in person. They called every Sunday, all 3 on speaker. How's your hip, Mom? Do you need any prescriptions refilled? Anything around the house that needs fixing? Their voices were careful, practiced, the pauses between questions too measured to be real. It was like talking to polite strangers who had memorized their lines but couldn't remember why the play mattered. I let it go on for 3 months, long enough to let them believe performance was enough. Then I began. Nathan was first. I called him on a Tuesday morning, mid-quarter, when I knew his firm would be under pressure. I asked if he could help me move some old filing cabinets in the basement. "Nothing major," I said. "Just dusty. I don't trust my back with them anymore." He hesitated. "Couldn't you just hire someone?" "I could," I replied, "but I thought you might want to help go through your father's old business papers. Some of them might be relevant." He showed up 40 minutes later, still in a suit, clearly expecting it to take half an hour. It took 6. The basement was cold and cluttered, filled with boxes of records, manuals, and contracts from decades of Henry's work. I pointed to 4 metal cabinets against the wall. "These, sorted. Anything you think is important to your inheritance, set aside." By hour 2, he had taken off his jacket. By hour 4, his shirt sleeves were rolled up. By hour 6, his knees were covered in dust and frustration. Then, in the back of the 3rd cabinet, he found something, a partnership agreement, dated 15 years earlier. It outlined a path to full executive authority, one that, if filed and updated, would have granted Nathan far more control than the current trust ever allowed. He looked up at me, flushed with excitement. "Mom, this could change everything. I could restructure." I didn't let him finish. "Restructure what, Nathan?" He blinked. "I just meant the company. If the board—" "You mean your company," I said. He froze, realizing what he'd revealed. I took the paper from his hand and placed it in a folder. "I'll have Mr. Whitmore review it." The glow in his face disappeared. He didn't argue. He left with a sore back, missed calls, and nothing to show for it, except the slow recognition that he had labored for hours and still needed my permission for anything that mattered. Claire's test came next. I called her firm on a Friday afternoon and said I needed legal advice. Insurance issue, storm damage to the roof, maybe a clause I didn't understand. "I don't specialize in property law," she said, her voice clipped. "I understand," I replied, "but I figured keeping it in the family would save time." She came that evening, briefcase in hand, laptop already open. We sat at the kitchen table for nearly 3 hours while she explained storm coverage, deductibles, exclusions. Then she asked, "What exactly is the issue, Mom?" "There isn't one," I said, sipping my tea. "I just wanted to be prepared." She stared at me. "You mean there's no actual claim?" "Not yet," I said calmly. "But I appreciate the clarity. You were thorough." She stayed the weekend, not because she wanted to, but because I asked if we could review all my other policies too, medical, auto, estate directives. By Sunday night, she'd produced a 47-page binder. I filed it next to the partnership agreement. 2 down. Gabriel had always been the softest of the 3, the one who slipped Mama into conversations even in adulthood when he was tired or flustered, the one who still texted me pictures of his dog in funny sweaters, the one who never liked confrontation, but also never stopped his siblings when they took control. I waited until the 1st anniversary of Henry's death. I called Gabriel that morning, my voice low even, like I hadn't rehearsed it 3 times. "I'm feeling a little off today," I said. "Would you mind coming by tonight? I thought we could look through some old photo albums together." He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there after my last appointment." By 6:30, he arrived in his vet scrubs, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and fur. His hair was messy, his eyes already tired, but his hands were gentle when he hugged me, and that mattered more than he knew. We sat in the living room with boxes of photos spread across the coffee table, pictures from beach trips, school recitals, Henry teaching them how to change tires in the driveway, each snapshot a time capsule of a life that felt borrowed now. "Remember this one?" I asked, holding up a faded photo of 5-year-old Gabriel on his first day of kindergarten, clutching a dinosaur-shaped lunchbox. He smiled. I was terrified, thought everyone would laugh at me. I nodded. And what happened? He chuckled softly. 3 other kids had dinosaur lunchboxes. We became friends that same day. He reached for the next photo, his fingers lingering on the edge. There was a visible shift in him. His shoulders slumped just slightly, the weight of the evening starting to show. We kept going, picture after picture. Sunday pancakes, Halloween costumes, backyard snowball fights, Henry standing tall behind them, me always in the corners, holding juice boxes or smoothing collars. Present, but never centered. When we reached a photo of the 4 of us in front of the old house, something broke in him. Quietly. Mom! His voice cracked. I'm so sorry. For what we said, for how we acted. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I remember everything you did. I looked at him, this grown man with trembling fingers and a wet face, and felt still. Not angry, not triumphant, just still. Do you know what I remember, Gabriel? He glanced up, eyes wide. I remember you standing next to your siblings at the funeral. I remember you looking right at me when they said I'd be cared for from a distance. You didn't object. You didn't flinch. You let it happen. He closed his eyes, as if that would soften the truth. I was scared, he whispered. Nathan had everything planned. Claire said it would be easier this way. I didn't know how to say no. But you didn't try, I said. That's what I remember. The box of photos sat between us, still open. He reached for one more, a picture of us holding hands at the zoo. He didn't speak again. I let the silence sit. Later that night, when he left, I didn't offer comfort. I didn't say, I forgive you. I simply closed the lid of the photo box, returned it to the shelf, and marked a quiet truth in my mind. Even the child who once needed you most will choose silence, if it protects their comfort. And from that moment on, I stopped looking for warmth in their gestures, because love, once tested, either deepens or dissolves, and Gabriel had shown me which side he stood on. 6 months passed. On paper, everything looked perfect. The payments arrived, punctual, precise, $8,000 every month, straight from Nathan's business account. Claire sent her quarterly share with a note in the memo line. Q, to transfer. Gabriel used cashier's checks, always folded into a card, always handwritten, never opened. Every Sunday at 10 a.m. sharp, the speakerphone rang. Good morning, Mom. How's your blood pressure? Have you scheduled your dental cleaning? Do you want help putting up storm windows? Each question felt like a checkbox on a form they didn't design but had learned to submit. I answered politely. Briefly. The calls rarely lasted more than 15 minutes. Not because I cut them short, but because none of them knew how to stretch the silence anymore. This was not connection. This was compliance. They visited, of course, once a month, like a rota. Claire came with printed lists of monthly household inspections. Nathan arrived with spreadsheets and questions about tax deductions. Gabriel brought groceries and stayed a little longer, but only ever smiled when I wasn't looking. I didn't interrupt any of it, because I wanted to see how long they could pretend the frame hadn't rotted. After the 3rd month, I added a new routine, notes. I kept a logbook, handwritten, bound in green leather, kept beside the fireplace. Every visit was logged, every call time-stamped, every expense recorded. I wasn't trying to be petty. I was building a mirror so they could one day look back and see what caring really looked like when done out of obligation. One morning in July, I received a letter from Gabriel. Not a check, not a form, a real letter. Inside, he'd written, Mom, I know this isn't what you wanted. I don't know how to fix it, but I hope one day you'll let us try. I placed it inside the logbook. No reply. Because even the sincerest apology loses its warmth when it arrives after compliance becomes survival. In August, Claire proposed we hire a full-time nurse. She'd live in, she said, so we wouldn't miss anything. I looked at her over the rim of my teacup. Is that your way of offering distance again, Claire? She blinked. No, of course not. I just thought... I know exactly what you thought, I said. You thought the money was doing its job, and now you're looking for convenience. She said nothing after that. Nathan, meanwhile, began suggesting a financial reevaluation. We could optimize the allowance, he said, roll some of it into long-term care insurance, maybe create a tax-advantaged trust. I stared at him for a long time, until he looked away. They still hadn't realized that every effort to make this easier for themselves was, in fact, a quiet confession. They had never planned to love me again, only to meet the terms, and that was fine, because I no longer needed their closeness. What I needed was already written, already signed, already binding. All I had to do now was hold the mirror steady and let them see what they'd become. It started with the calendar. I didn't mark my next medical checkup, just left it blank. No alerts, no reminders. Normally, Claire would have cross-referenced it from our monthly coordination spreadsheet. But that month, she was busy with a case out of state. The following Sunday, Nathan asked, "You've had your physical this quarter, right?" I looked straight ahead and said, "Of course." He nodded, didn't ask for proof, didn't offer to follow up. The month passed. I left the storm windows unopened. I left a trash bin full, deliberately forgotten by the back door. The porch light flickered. I didn't replace it. Daniel came by one afternoon and stood in the kitchen as I poured coffee. "I saw the trash by the garage," he said. I smiled faintly. "Yes, it's been there a while." He shifted uncomfortably. "You didn't call anyone?" "I wanted to see if anyone would notice." He didn't reply. None of them did. Claire arrived 2 days later with cinnamon rolls, a peace offering without a war. I let them sit on the counter, unopened. The frosting pooled at the bottom of the container by morning. "Mom," she said, "is something wrong?" I shook my head. Why would anything be wrong? But something had changed, and she knew it. The logbook now had red markings, not emotional ones, just missed items, skipped calls, delayed responses, notes like 3 minutes late, no follow-up. I wasn't documenting to punish them. I was simply recording patterns, because distance doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in inches. I remembered a time when Gabriel would have come by unannounced after a bad storm, when Claire used to call me from the pharmacy just to ask if I needed shampoo, when Nathan would forward me recipes because I once told him I liked rosemary. None of that existed now. Instead, they asked if the password to my bank app still worked. Instead, they asked if I was keeping receipts. Instead, they asked if the cameras were still online. They had installed them, of course. 2 little black devices tucked discreetly in the corners of the living room and kitchen. "Just in case," they said, "for your safety." But I knew better. They weren't watching for danger. They were watching for deviation, to make sure I stayed within the bounds of what the will required, but not an inch beyond. And so I gave them something small, a misstep, just to see. I unplugged the kitchen camera, not all day, just for 3 hours on a Tuesday. No one called, no one asked. I left the plug dangling, visible, obvious. When Nathan came that weekend, he didn't mention it. When Claire sent her follow-up email, it ended with, "Glad everything's smooth." And Gabriel? He stopped by with a grocery bag and never looked up once. That night, I sat alone in the armchair by the fire, Henry's chair, and stared into the embers until they faded to ash. I had given them 100 ways to prove they were still mine. Instead, They showed me how carefully they were measuring their distance, how thoroughly they were failing, even when succeeding. By the 9th month, I stopped expecting warmth. It was easier that way, easier to see their gestures for what they were, contractual, performed, emotionally pre-approved. They came when required, called when scheduled, deposited without delay, and yet, in all of it, I felt more alone than I ever had the year Henry died. One Saturday, Claire arrived with her usual binder and a tight smile. "We're doing well, aren't we?" she said, flipping through notes. "All the check-ins, the payments, the logs, everything's on track." I watched her highlight a section labeled Emotional Engagement. Check-in queue. 3 complete. She looked proud, as if my affection were a KPI. "Do you know what makes this all feel empty?" I asked her. She paused. "What? You think because you're doing everything right, I'll forget how wrong it began?" She stiffened. "We were grieving." "You were planning," I corrected. Claire didn't reply, but her silence said enough. The next week, Nathan emailed a proposed restructure, again, a trust revision, a clause amendment, something about financial efficiency. He always phrased it like a gift. "This isn't sustainable," he wrote. "Surely even you can see that, Mom." I didn't reply. I just printed the email and added it to the folder labeled "When They Stop Pretending." Gabriel, for his part, still tried. Still dropped off homemade soup in reused containers. Still sat quietly on the porch, not knowing what to say. But his effort had become apology, and I was tired of receiving apologies with no action behind them. One night, I left all the porch lights off. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your joints before you notice it's there. Gabriel sat on the step anyway. He didn't knock. He didn't ask to come in. He just waited. After an hour, he left the soup at the door. When I opened the lid, it was still warm, but I didn't eat it because I didn't want warmth that was offered in fear. I wanted the kind that comes from love, and fear had become their language now. Fear of forfeiture, fear of clause violation, fear of what might happen if they stopped performing. It was around this time that I moved Henry's chair from the living room into the study. A quiet relocation. No announcement, no explanation. The next time Claire visited, she glanced at the empty space and said, "Something looks different in here." I said, "It's just more honest." She didn't ask what I meant, but I think she knew, because the truth was this. They had built a life where I was central only in theory, visible in calendar blocks, present in wire transfers, absent in heart. And when people fulfill a role only to avoid consequence, they forget one thing. The person at the center of it all still remembers who they used to be. And I had remembered. I was no longer their mother in the way I once was. I was now the measure they feared, the witness they avoided, the voice that never needed to raise itself to be heard. I didn't call a family meeting. There was no final confrontation, no raised voices, no moment where the past cracked open and spilled apologies across the floor. I simply stopped participating, stopped answering every call, stopped smiling politely during check-ins, stopped offering tea when they arrived, clutching clipboards and controlled warmth. I let the structure remain, but I removed myself from it. I became still. One Sunday, Gabriel called late. Not late by the clock, late by habit. Normally, they rang in unison at 10 a.m. sharp. That day, it came at 10:37. Claire and Nathan weren't on the line. "Mom," he said, voice cautious, "we're wondering if you're okay. You've seemed distant lately." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I replied, "I'm precisely where you left me." He didn't answer. In October, I wrote a letter. Not legal, not emotional, just true. 3 paragraphs, folded, placed in each of their mailboxes by hand. It said, "I no longer expect anything from you except what was agreed. Your inheritance remains safe, for now. But I don't want you to know, the day I feel your care has returned to convenience, the terms change." Nothing more, No signature, just my name, typed plainly, Elaine. By December, the routine was tighter than ever. The house was cleaner, the lawn neater, the calls more punctual, but the air between us, sterile. That Christmas, for the first time, no one invited me anywhere. They all had plans, so I cooked for one. Henry's favorite stew, my favorite music, a single glass of wine, and a fire that burned low and steady. I set the table with our wedding china and placed a single framed photo across from me, the one where he and I stood barefoot in the garden, laughing at something the kids had done. It was the only photo I hadn't locked away, because it was the only one untouched by what came after. I think about Henry often now, not with pain, but with precision. I remember his insistence that we write the will together. I remember his eyes, tired but bright, as he whispered, "They won't see it coming." And he was right. They hadn't seen me, not for years, but now they see. They see me in every automatic transfer, in every clause they double-check, in every hesitation before they speak my name, not as mom, but as the arbiter of their comfort. They gave up love for control. I gave up forgiveness for truth. And now we live in that middle space, cordial, contractual, clean. But I am not sad, because I am not waiting anymore. I do not want their affection. I do not want their excuses. I want only this, that one day, far from now, when someone asks them what happened, they will say, "She was the woman we tried to manage, but in the end, she managed us all."